Welcome back to the Athlete Climate Academy. I'm super excited today because we're joined by a man who has loads and loads of accolades, loads and loads of exciting topics to talk about. It's Alex Moore from Long Island University, Climate Change Institute and Harvard University. Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Trying to pick topics for today's conversation, I wasn't at a loss for trying to find things, but it seemed to me that one thing we definitely talk about is how humans move around the planet and how we have done in the past, how we will do in the future. That seems to be a bit of a core to all the things that you do, right?
Yes, we often think that we're independent of climate, that we're independent of the environment in terms of how we move and how we relate, how we live our lives. But in reality, I don't think any of us, don't look at what temperature is going to be today before they get dressed in the morning. And I don't think any of us plan their commute to work, if they are still commuting, without knowing what the weather is going to be today. And if climate is just weather on a large scale over years and decades and centuries, and it affects how people live, how people move, where they live, how they eat, what water they can drink, and what diseases they experience.
We've just had a prime example of that because we've just are living currently through a big pandemic, which isn't the first, definitely won't be the last. And I imagine climate change will have an effect on how many pandemics we see in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, just like climate change changes the way where people live, how they move around, what resources they can use, water. If there's less water, people will move away where there's more water or food. The animals do exactly the same thing, and they do it every year through migrations that are all around us all the time. And we're actually now in the peak migration season in New York City, which is in the Atlantic flyway. So we'll see all these tropical birds going north, and we'll see them back, and starting in July coming back. But all sorts of other animals do that as well. And animals carry their diseases with them. They can't filter their water when they drink, and they can't cook their food when they eat. So they carry all their diseases with them. And we have changed the environment enough that those diseases are, in fact, now encroaching into our lives. Coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, is a perfect example. Because we have encroached into the wild of East Asia and brought back a bug, a disease, a virus that we had never been exposed to, and for the last 18 months we've been mired in this global crisis because of it. I don't know if it was connected to climate. May very well have been. We don't know. Climatic changes will affect how the disease spreads, for sure, just simply because people will move differently, and just like the flu, if you're in enclosed spaces, it's much easier to catch the disease. But we will see more animals encroaching into our environments into our urban environments, as long as we take our cities into woodlands and remove natural spaces. That's why it's important to protect and preserve natural wild wilderness the way it is, and never to use wild animals, as a food resource.
I think you're spot on, and one of the things that keeps going on these conversations for me is how connected everything is. Mm-hmm. And like you say, like climate change, it's hard to pin what climate change does have an effect on. You almost can never do it. You can say that it might exacerbate this thing or might help do this thing. But what we do know is that when it comes to pandemics, is that the things that we're doing that exacerbate climate change are also the things that are not going to help when it comes to being in contact with animals. So, for example, deforestation is going to just force animals into smaller and smaller patches, and then we keep building our infrastructure further and further onto animal land. Neither of those things are good for climate change, and neither of them are good for pandemics either.
No, they're not. And this is This is something that we still don't understand. We just think that we can sprawl into any environment, any land that's empty. Right? This is in the United States. It's manifest destiny. It's connected to our entire history. John Winthrop, when he first landed in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, what became the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the land of the Massachusetts people. He saw, speaking of diseases, he saw the indigenous people who had helped him get through the winter. He saw them disappear, really, villages that were emptied, and he actually said the land was empty for us by God, manifest destiny. And that was because they brought all the diseases from Europe and infected everybody. We have this concept that we can just take land. That land is subdued, has to be subdued, is subordinate to us. That the natural environment is subordinate to us, and that we can change it and we can control it. And what I keep saying with my research and in conversation with people who are less knowledgeable about this, or that just haven't paid as much attention to it, which is totally fine, is nature is very complex, and it was here millions of years before we were around, and it found a balance. There are cycles in that balance that we don't even know exist, and that's why the interconnectedness, which is at the basis of what we call One Health, a connection of the health of the environment, the health of animals, health of humans, all together, or planetary health in its latest form. That's another way to call it. These concepts have been understood for centuries by indigenous Americans, for example. It's traditional knowledge of many indigenous cultures of North and South America. And we really need to understand that this is how nature works, because we have been changing it for now more than a century, very, very severely, and more than a millennium on a smaller scale, with pollution and with carbon emissions and all sorts of other ways. And one thing one example, instead of speaking in abstracts, the change in the Arctic in terms of temperature for the last 2 decades is equivalent to the change in temperature that the entire globe, the entire planet experienced when we came out of the last ice age. Right? And it happened in 2 decades. The Arctic is on fire compared to the rest of the... If the rest of the world had warmed as much as the Arctic has on average, it would be unlivable. I mean, so where would people live? I mean, where would they go? They would go where it's cooler and where there's more water, which is what we're seeing in migrations all around the world. And it's exacerbating, it's making all sorts of political crisis worse, religious conflict, struggle for resources, water, particularly water stress, and food security. We've seen this in Syria. Many articles on how the Syrian crisis was made worse by climate change, possibly even sparked by climate change. I can go back into more detail about that. Africa is the same way. Sub-Saharan Africa is experiencing more than 90 days above 95 degrees every year. That's unlivable. It's just not livable if you don't have air conditioning. And most of Southeast Asia and South Asia are converting to air conditioning, which increases the demand of energy, which increases more emissions, the emissions, carbon emissions, which increases the temperature. So we're stuck in a cycle, chasing our tail. And what we need to do is understand that that's happening, be self-aware of it, and we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep getting what we're getting.
And I think that it's very much a given that what we're going to see over the next, especially till 2100, is we're going to see patterns emerge of people moving from place to place. I mean, it's definitely going to happen on small scales. I know that I'm buying a new house at the moment, and I'm looking at where I can buy that house. And my wife will say, "What about this one?" And I'll say, "It's pretty close to that river. I'm not sure I want to stay there. We get a lot of rain in Wales." So I'm starting to take that into consideration now, and many people Well, so what are the patterns that we're going to see across the globe in terms of migration? If you can break the entire planet down in 3 minutes for us, that'd be great.
Okay. All right. Well, what is climate change? Climate change is instability, right? That's what really it is. We don't say global warming as much because it's not warming everywhere the same way, and not all the time. It is warming overall. That is the overall trend. But it's also the weather patterns that we know we come to expect, like monsoons or rains or hurricanes, particularly hurricanes. That's very familiar to all of us who live on the Atlantic coast, are going to become more extreme. And access to water is going to become less common for many communities because of warming. So the number of days above 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 30, I don't know how many days in Celsius, I'm sorry. I have fully immigrated and converted into American units, I'm afraid. But you know, when I lived in Europe, above 30 Celsius, it started to get really annoying to me, really unlivable. And we're talking about 40. You know, number of days above 40 Celsius, above a temperature that basically makes life impossible outside, is for more than half an hour. You get dehydrated. You can't run. You can't do a physical activity. The number of days per year is increasing up to 3 months in most areas south of in the tropical zone, and that's just catastrophic because most developing economies, developing countries, are still very much agricultural. They don't have air conditioning, climate control of indoor spaces, and that makes it impossible for them to survive. Water evaporates a lot faster. Therefore, there's less access to water stress, as we call it. And when you have no water, you can't grow food, and so you're going to have food security patterns. So food security issues. So what we'll be seeing is a migration north or south, wherever it's colder and less tropical, we're going to see people really abandon the liminal spaces, as they're called, the sort of semi-desert spaces, where they've been able to make a living so far by adapting to the environment or adapting the environment to their needs. But it's just becoming impossible for, Australia is really, really hot right now. It's basically a desert country for 90% of it. And my Australian friends keep saying it's getting hotter and hotter every year. The Great Barrier Reef, the largest, animal constructed structure in the world, the only thing that you can see from space that animals, including humans, have produced, is getting bleached and destroyed every year because of warming and ocean acidification. That has a direct effect on food security because people fish, people produce, live off of the ocean. It's happening all over Asia as well. So food security issues. 1/3 of the population of the world relies on fish for food, just as their primary source of food. 1/3. That's 3 billion people. That's a lot of people. So we're already seeing the migrations. We're seeing them in the African continent. We're seeing in the Middle East. We're seeing them in South America, Central America, and we're seeing them on a small scale also in developed countries. Manhattan's emptied, and not just because of COVID. There is heat island effects, so-called, where cities are so much hotter than their surrounding areas. Try and step into woodland, and you will feel the temperature drop, right, 10 degrees, because it's there is shade and the trees are protecting you. Well, guess what? The real estate of Wyoming, of wooded places, wooden open wild places, Montana, is skyrocketing right now, and the real estate in Manhattan, for every person that moves to Manhattan, 3 have left. So we're actually seeing this also in the developed world, and people just deciding that it's better to be in nature. Which, again, if we do it carefully and we don't encroach on wild spaces and we don't destroy wild spaces, we just take up space that we've already taken, and it's probably a good thing, because people being connected to nature and the environment and seeing the changes in the environment is what we need for people to be really reconnected to those trends, those natural trends that we evolved with as humans, and actually understand, oh, okay, the climate is changing, and this is not good for me. So that's okay. It was more than 3 minutes. Apologies.
I'll lay you off. It's fine. One of the things that I'm seeing more of at the moment is athletes and people who are in different parts of the world. I've got family in Hong Kong. I've got friends out in Nebraska, in the Cornhusker State, and whenever I'm in Hong Kong and I want to go out for a run, I'm checking the temperature as well and making sure that it's not. I'm a Celtic boy. I'm used to my rain. I'm not used to 40 Celsius running, but we are going to start to see that more, aren't we? So the health implications of our changing climate now are going to spread further than just these are the direct health implications. There's also going to be side effects. Mm-hmm. But what can we expect to see from those health implications on our populations?
Well, I mean, besides temperature, which you just very eloquently described, and just not being able to be outside for longer than an hour, without getting a heat stroke, or there are going to be also health implications in terms of vector-borne diseases. So, for example, diseases that used to be just tropical, that you knew when you went into tropical zones that you were at risk for Zika or for malaria or for dengue fever. Those were things that, okay, they could hit Florida, but not much farther north than Florida, or I don't know, they could hit Spain, but not much farther north than southern Spain. Well, guess what? Because of warming, the environment in which the mosquitoes that carried Zika or dengue or malaria has extended north to areas that were previously not habitats for these animals, for these insects. Excuse me. And that means that diseases like Zika, like dengue fever, like malaria are reaching, in fact, the southern shores, the southern part of New York State for us. This has been proven that the species of mosquitoes that carry these diseases has reached, in terms of warming, because of warming of the planet, states that were previously just not very different from Wales, very rainy and New England states. New York is not New England; it's Mid-Atlantic, but it can reach up to that area. So, are we going to be worried about our wives or our daughters becoming pregnant and having Zika? Are we going to be and having a child with microcephaly, which is almost always fatal condition? Are we going to be worried about malaria whenever we walk out of the door? Are we going to worry about dengue fever, which has had an increase in 35% of cases throughout throughout the world? Are we going to be worried more about Lyme disease, which, if you look at a map that I created, and I can send you the link to, I looked at the climate anomaly in the northeastern United States, and then I looked at the cases of Lyme disease as they have increased in the last decade. And the two areas where the cases have increased and where the climate anomaly is being worst, that is hottest, are exactly the same. And by removing predators, we have made deer more common, and deer is the favorite food of ticks. And by changing the climate, we've made the time in which ticks can reproduce twice as long. So the summer is actually twice as long for them, and so they can reproduce much longer. And then we've also made winters a lot milder, so the larvae can survive through the winter. And so we have ticks everywhere in our woodlands in the Northeast, and we have to be very, very careful every time we go in. So you want to take a run in the woods? Well, guess what? You got to be very careful and spray yourself. And there's actually a vaccine against Lyme disease. It's out of production because not enough people were taking it. Lyme disease is a serious disease that even with antibiotics, you're not going to get rid of it very easily. And some people have long Lyme, or claim to have long Lyme. Repercussions for many years of Lyme disease. Don't you want to be able to take a run in the woods? Don't you want to be able to not worry about that? These are all health implications of climate change.
And I tell you what, as a mountaineer in Wales and in the UK, I do think about it a lot, about Lyme disease. So thank you for scaring the bejesus out of me.
Well, here's the thing. There's also a hopeful side of all of this. And the thing is that we can actually change things. I often say to people, you guys, you can't be discussing always doom and gloom scenarios. The reality is that we change our economy, we change our markets every year. We change our habits every year. We change our fashions every season. If we can do that, then we can change the way we move, transport, not using fossil fuels, the energy sources. It takes more infrastructure, and that's why President Biden has created an infrastructure plan, $3 trillion. That's the basis of that change.
And I think you hit the nail on the head when you first started saying about that. Then was the discussing part of it is the thing that I think we can all do more of. I know that we're starting to get more and more bombarded in our little echo chambers of, I follow a lot of climate change scientists and activists and athletes who care about this kind of stuff. But it's important then that we discuss it with people outside our bubble as well. And I'm always so humbled by scientists like yourself who are just willing to take that time to sit down with people outside our bubble and say, this is what we need to discuss. These are things, people aren't getting vaccinated against Lyme disease. Let's talk about that because we can start doing it again. So I'm always thankful for scientists and athletes and everyone else who just takes that time to discuss it.
Absolutely. I think it's the most important thing, the most important part of my job, and the most important part of any influential person, much more influential, I'm not influential, but, public athletes who are, who have a following and are role models for so many people. I think the rule number one, whenever we discuss these things with anyone who is less familiar with the facts or skeptical or even hostile, is never to call people names, never to insult them, never to say that they're ignorant. It's to meet them where they are and understand them and be humble and patient. Because not everybody's had the privilege of an education or the privilege to be exposed to the facts and the information that we have been exposed to. And, that politeness, that empathy goes a long way. And the second thing is, if a house is on fire, you're, as my friend Jonathan Conrad says, if a house is on fire, you don't start asking who's set the fire. You get the people out. So let's not, that's the first step. Do we all agree that the house is on fire? Okay, great. So let's start thinking about how we're going to get the people out and how we're going to save the whatever we can save. And so here's one fact that anybody, I think, who is worried about climate or climate discussion encroaching on their business might actually really like to hear. In the history of the American economy, or in fact the world economy, we've always had people be very faithful to brands, which is the hardest part of becoming a new business. Right? I'm also an economist on the side. Well, guess what? There's one statistic that is the greatest asset of climate scientists and climate advocates and environmentalists, and that is that at the same price point, at the same cost, if the product costs the same as another product that's basically the same, 80% of customers will switch to the sustainable brand. 80% of customers will switch market share. That's how you enter. That's how you remove the biggest barrier of entry for those who are in the business world. That's how you actually become a successful business. That's how you take customers from one company to another, to yours, if you're sustainable and if you actually do the work of cleaning up your supply chain. That's incredible. It's never happened before. And no one really can explain it except to think, well, I'd like to do something for the environment. I do love it. So that's an asset for anyone who has a sponsorship deal or deals with any brands, uses any brands. I use Helly Hansen clothing a lot. If I had to, just an example. Patagonia does a fantastic job. I see that you have your sweater on. That's the biggest asset that we have on our side, biggest weapon, and it's a positive one.
Discussions and not calling people names, which is hard sometimes, but we have to absolutely do our best with that. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us for so long about this. I have a feeling that we will see you again at some point. I think you have a lot more to offer, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd be delighted to come back and chat more.